Hi, welcome to Color Light Motion, created and hosted by Victoria Vesna. I'm Bess Rocklitzer, president of the David Bermant Foundation, and today we have nationally acclaimed artist Anne Mccoy joining us. I recently enjoyed Anne's lecture on alchemy and art, and I'm very much looking forward to what she will share with us today. Please enjoy Anne Mccoy.
Hello, hello. I am equally excited to hear Anne talk. She definitely wears two big hats, both as an artist and as a lecturer, theorist, writer. She is a sculptor, painter, art critic, and she also is an editor at large for Brooklyn Rail. What I'm super interested in is this talk, because one of the pieces that I love and that students who would come with me to visit would just be wowed with is Otto Peine's work. And recently, very recently, actually, I found out that David Bermant used that piece as his coffee table, which really excited me to be so irreverent, which is really kind of the way he was. So without further ado, please welcome Anne Mccoy.
Thank you so much, Victoria. Oh, did something happen?
You're good. You're good. Go ahead.
Okay. Thank you so much. I'm thrilled to be asked, and it's so funny. I'm probably a rather strange person to ask to do this lecture, but I had seen this piece at the Guggenheim, and I fell in love with it. And I was teaching at Yale the last 10 years, oddly enough, not in the art department, but in the School of Drama in the design section, dealing with projection. So I had actually lectured on this piece. So when I saw it, I thought, wow, this is something I can lecture about. As you know, Otto Peine he and Hans Mach were sort of the founders of the Zero group. And he was really, I think of him in terms of a kind of post-war Germany. As a 16-year-old, he was one of those boys who is kind of recruited into Hitler's army, you know, when everyone else to kind of defend Germany in the last stand. And he was a gunner. And he became interested actually in light from watching the searchlights and operating the searchlights with the guns. And it's funny because the person I lecture on is another kind of a late in the game soldier, and that was Joseph Beuys. I knew Joseph Beuys in Germany, in Berlin in the 70s. So, and in Switzerland through Harold Zeeman. So it's actually funny that my interests had sort of gone in exactly the opposite direction, in the direction of people like Steiner and Beuys. So I'm actually really touched that you chose me for this lecture. I'm going to hit the first slide here with my magic screen share. And now I hit the magic play. We're up and running. Okay, I don't know. Many of you, I don't know if many of you probably know a lot about the Zero group. I will try to make this fairly brief. The Zero group, the two founders were really Hans Mach and Otto Peine, and it was a group that came out of Dusseldorf, which was not really a big art center in kind of the post-war German period in the late 50s. And I think that you have to look at the time in which it came out. I mean, at this point, Germany had pretty much been flattened by the war. And so out of the ashes of sort of this regime came this idea for a new art movement. I also think of this movement not both as a new art movement, but also as a kind of continuation of movements that were sort of interrupted when Hitler came to power, and a lot of the Bauhaus fled, and there was kind of a big interruption. And because of the fascist period, they sort of went back into kind of a figurative and very regressive kind of art. So I actually think of Peine coming out of as a kind of continuation of a lot of other explorations that began with the Bauhaus and also were kind of left over from bits of Dada, Russian constructivism. You have to remember that, pre-war Germany was really kind of like I mean, you had all of these different groups coming in. You had the Russian constructivists coming in. You had the Dadas. You had all of these different groups sort of descending and crisscrossing at this time. So I'm going to be discussing a little bit about that and some of the influences of Peine. Briefly, when you think of the Zero group, you think of several things. You would think of monochromatic painting, a kind of departure from the old painting of the brush and the palette, et cetera, an emphasis on energy and an emphasis on space, and also adding in that other element of time. I think that, so for all of you who are involved with kinetic art, this may be sort of old hat, but I'm going to be taking this perhaps in a direction that you may not have seen.
Kind of painting. I was a painter first before I became a sculptor and light artist and all of that. And as a painter, I used stencils. And from there came projecting light into space. The idea of the rastas just came from using lights that could shine through these perforated cardboard panels and metal panels. The development, the evolution of sculpture, of metal sculpture in my work happened then.
A lot. So I've showed you this really beginning clip of Peine. First of all, he was alive till quite recently. He lived till I think about 2014. He died actually going to one of his big openings at the Neue Gallery in Berlin. So I wanted to show that, to show kind of the one of the early inspirations behind that piece. This is not a new technology. This idea of projecting light through a perforated surface. This is actually a very common theater technology that I've used them thousands of times. In fact, I've invented these guys. This is called the lighting gobo, and it's a metal template that is placed in the middle of one of those big theater lamps, and then that's how you get things like leaf patterns on stages. This is a star pattern. You've seen hundreds of theater projections with the stars. So this was probably a pretty old technology that began when they started getting theatrical lighting units. There were different versions of this. So in a way, what interests me about Peine is that you have this intersection between the world of theater and also the world of art. And the next, one of the biggest influences that you had with Peine talks about in his work is he talks about Laszlo Holinage, and this was called the light space modulator. Oopsie, I don't know. I think that's in German. Anyway, and this was a piece that was done in sort of the Bauhaus period. And the thing about Holinage is that he was also a set designer. He was one of those artists who did everything. And so you had this piece where you had a kind of light moving through perforations, you had the kinetic element, and you had the idea of projecting light into space and movement. So these were part of the things where you had this idea of space and time, but also of creating an entire environment, so that in a stage situation, you were sitting in the audience, but that in an imaginal space, you entered into the space of the theater. So he was not the only member of the Bauhaus working this way. There were groups around Schwitter's. There was just a conference in Berlin 2 years ago where Bradley Eros and a group of people took one of these amazing old light boxes where you had 3 or 4 people operating inside with colored panels and projection. So the Bauhaus, a lot of people in the Bauhaus were, or some people were working with these kinds of ideas about moving light and also kinetic elements or moving elements. And this was all sort of stopped when Hitler came to power, and then also a lot of these people came to the United States. So this was really one of his first influences that he talks about. Another influence that he talks about, where you have the namesake of this piece, is a movie. It was kind of a late Dadaist film by Ferdinand Léger. And bear with me, and you're going to have to sit through a couple minutes of this, but I want you to see this, and then we'll talk about it. Oh, ballet mécanique. It's called light ballet. So I think that I'm not going to play the whole film. I wanted to show you that film because, first of all, when you're talking about it in classes, people really always introduce it as the Dada film, the first non-narrative film that doesn't have sort of beginning, middle, and the end, a kind of deconstructed film. But I wanted to talk about it in terms of Peine's work for perhaps another reason. And that is, with this film, you have a lot of the Peine had some of his first works were these kind of sculptures that were with kind of pyramid type panes, so that you get that with light passing through, so that you can see that the kind of space he created is very much the same kind of space you see in this film, where the viewer really enters a kind of a space that with all of these double exposures, a space with all of these lighting effects. You enter this kind of kaleidoscopic space as the viewer. And you can see how this very, very much influenced Peine, where with his light ballet, he was really creating a similar kind of space. And you see snippets of this in this film. This film has influenced a lot of people, including William Kentridge, who actually, some of his technicians actually built some of those kaleidoscopic things to do projections with. So I wanted to show you that film because I think that it gave you an idea of the possibility of a kind of new kind of non-narrative space. And again, this is where you get, in this period, I think especially with the Bauhaus, you started getting this amazing crossover between set design, film, and art, where they're kind of one would feed the other and come back into the dialogue. So what I want to do is I'm going to show you, this is very short, but I wanted to show you the piece in action. Now, this piece, this light ballet, has been set up many different times in many different museums with slightly different configurations. So I wanted to, this is the least annoying one, which doesn't have cocktail chatter or something in the background. So hopefully this will do the job. I think that it's funny because I've seen some of the later Peine pieces. As you know, Peine had sort of he had a very long career, and he had a big career in America. Both Mach and Peine came to the United States. He was very involved at MIT. He did giant sort of extravaganzas with tubes floating up into the sky, et cetera, and many more sort of colorful things. But it's one of these things where, for me particularly, I think that this piece is really, in terms of the Zero group, this piece is really the jewel in the crown. I'm also a fan of Heinz Mach, but I think for me that this was really one of the great poetic works, and perhaps the best of all of the Zero group. And I've always been completely knocked out by it. The Zero group is interesting because it started as this nucleus with Heinz Mach and Otto Peine, and then you got Tingley, and then you got people like Yves Klein added in, Paul Bury, all kinds of other artists. So it started as this kind of kernel, and then a lot of people working with kinetic art, with all of these constructions, geometric constructions, et cetera, kind of identified with this group and kind of were add-ons. So it was kind of, it was a sort of a movement, or it sort of spread. And sadly, it also kind of degenerated in a way. I mean, maybe I shouldn't say this, but I'm not a big fan of some of the later kinetic art, like sort of the Fletcher Benton type stuff. But for me, there was something about this Peine work that just the simplicity and the purity of it. And I started I did a kind of a meditation on this work, because for someone who was not really big on the zero group generally, I mean, like I never liked, the sliced, the little holes of Peters, or or sort of the, some of the other, like the Fontana's sliced canvases, monochromatic canvases, or too many nails pounded in. But for me, this piece was really a milestone. And I started I went back to see it at the Guggenheim maybe 10 times and spent a lot of time with it. And I started thinking about it in a way that maybe is a little bit unconventional, but I wanted to kind of proceed with that. I just put a couple of space holders in here while I was talking. To me, the piece came out of a larger explorations and also larger ways of seeing things. For me, it was a magical space. And the only time I had ever thought of a space like this was with Dante. And here in Paradiso, here you have Dante and Beatrice kind of residing in the stars. And the whole time I was looking at that Peine piece, I thought of this. I thought, someone has actually created this space where we are living among the stars. And I started thinking of this Peine piece in terms of cosmologies and in terms of our way of looking at the cosmos and a way of looking at the sky. And it's funny because later in his life, Peine, when he was at MIT, started doing these collaborative pieces with astronomers and the like. And then at the end of his life, those giant, big inflatable arm like anemone going out into outer space. So it's funny. I mean, maybe this was also part of his vision. I don't know. I mean, he might have hated this lecture. I wanted to think about this in terms of a kind of cosmology. I think that one of the problems with students today is many students have sort of no kind of religious ideas, or they don't have any ideas of kind of a creation myth or where they came from or their place in the cosmos the way ancient people did. So that I think that for many students, they probably think, well, there was the Big Bang theory, and then we're out here as a speck in space somewhere. And then at the end of it, we're just sort of sucked back into a black hole, and that's it. So that the idea of a kind of spiritual cosmos has been kind of extinguished in a kind of secular world generally. But this was really not the case for the ancients. And for me, the Peine piece took me back into something that was much more ancient, which is what I liked about it. In ancient cosmologies, this is kind of a typical model of a cosmologies. You have the earth as kind of you have the cosmos with these different layers going up to the heavens and different layers going down into the underworld. And it was very depressing for me. The last year I taught at Yale, I was lecturing on cosmologies and with 48 graduate students. And I said, to understand cosmologies, a good way to think about them in the West is to read Dante. And I said, how many people have read Dante? And this is Yale graduate school. And one person raised their hand. And it made me very depressed, because I think that it's important to think in terms of cosmologies, because this cosmologies, if they exist in the outer world, but they also exist within the psyche. So that for a piece of art to resonate, I think that it's like the microcosm, macrocosm idea that the inner cosmos is then projected into the outer world. A thinker that I like very, very much, who's written about our age in this way, a book called Cosmos and Psyche, is a man who teaches at the Institute for Integral Studies in San Francisco, named Richard Tarnas. So here is a kind of typical model of the cosmos, of the universe. Now, the Egyptians were very understood very much this idea of living within the stars. The Egyptians had something called the Egyptian Book of the Dead. And here you have, this is from the funerary ceiling of Seti I in the Valley of the Kings. And with the, in the Egyptian cosmology, the nut, this is the only place, incidentally, I can think of in mythology where you have a reversal, where the sky is represented by the feminine and the earth, Geb, is represented by the male. In almost every other cosmology, the male sky gods are up here, and Mother Earth is, and Kib and Gaia is down below. So that this is a reversal of it. And at night, she swallows the sun that passes through her body through the hours of the night. And the hours of the night are kind of places that one populates with the Egyptian Book of the Dead. One goes through these different pylons, one goes through these different places, so that, and also within this cosmology, Nut forms an arch over Egypt. So you have this kind of Egyptocentric thing where she acts as a protection. In most ancient cosmologies, you had a kind of sky god who acted as a protector of the earth, so that rather than disappearing into a black hole and that's the end of the wall game, you had a protective deity or the gods up above, so that, and the stars, you basically could live in this imaginal space within the stars. This is called the Pantheon, and the Pantheon is kind of the temple of all of the gods. And you had this oculus looking up into the sky. And so that you have this idea of being protected with this incredible ocular and this incredible dome. It's such an interesting building. They made it using volcanic ash within the cement, this waffle pattern. They also took empty wine bottles and impregnated them into the cement, so that this was the biggest span that was created, and they couldn't because they hadn't rediscovered concrete, they couldn't recreate it for millennia, for decades, thousands of years, hundreds of years. So that this is kind of an amazing space as an imaginal space, and as an imaginal space where you have this kind of canopy representing the canopy of all of the gods. And it's interesting because in your program, Kristen Jones, who has done work within this structure, we were both different times, but we were both fellows at the American Academy. And she actually has done a lot of work with this, and you had a wonderful lecture on this. I'm a big fan of this work. So one of the things that's interesting is how we imagine the universe. And there are many different ways that we imagine the universe. This is, let me just get my notes here. This is Kepler. This is a wonderful piece by Kepler. And of course, I've lost my notes. With his polyhedrons, so that you had in the ancient world, starting with Aristotle, you had this idea where these ideas about the cosmos, these ideas about these models would kind of go between mathematics and science back into the imagination. And you always had this kind of movement back and forth between these different forces. I've always loved this thing. Here again, you have many of these models where with early astronomy, you started thinking of the stars, and you thought of the stars as being part of this model of the universe. This is an architect who has always interested me. And I think that this is an amazing book. This is my favorite book on the subject, called Symbolic Space. And the Boulez was one of several French architects during the period after the Revolution. And this was a time after, kind of the time of the Enlightenment, a time when the monarchy was dead, and you had this opening of new ways of thinking about the world, new ways of thinking about the city. It was when where you would have, like in the paintings of David, you would have works based on great ideas, you know, like valor or sacrifice, or, you know, these bigger ideas, and these would be honored. I mean, for example, you know, they reinvented things like for example, people had been buried in potter's fields, and they wanted a kind of dignity in death, even for the common man. So they invented these huge cemetery complexes with pyramids where everyone could be buried in dignity, and the city was to be envisioned, where you would have things like green belts and practices like fresh water and hygiene, things that really hadn't been part of this experience. And so Boulez, this is an incredible temple that he built. And of course, I don't have my glasses. Hang on a second here. This was an incredible temple that he built. Let's see if I can see this now. And here he's talking about it, and he's saying, and it's called Newton's centigraph. Let me see if there's another picture of it here. It's called Newton's centigraph, and it was a tribute to Newton. And here's what he's saying. Ah, Newton, since by the magnitude of your wisdom and sublimity of your genius, you have determined the initial shape of the earth as a perfect sphere, I in turn have conceived the project of enveloping you within your discovery. I have wanted to characterize your sepulcher with the figure of the earth. The interior of the sepulcher is conceived in the same spirit, utilizing your divine system of a unifying cosmic principle of gravity in the form of a monument as a vast sphere. So these were actually all projects which were not exactly fantasy projects, but none of them were ever realized. They were, first of all, they were wildly impractical. But although they were never realized, they influenced many, many architects down to, all the contemporary architects have been very, very much influenced by these unrealized projects. And this one is interesting because this was part of his Newton's centigraph. And here you have this is it in the daytime. So you're down here at the bottom, you go in this little thing, and the stars are projected by sunlight entering little holes. So it's the first kind of idea of sort of a planetarium that we have. And it's also the first idea of us being in a very idealistic space where, like the figures in like Beatrice and Dante, we live among the stars. This is the nighttime version of this. So this kind of early technology really influenced the idea of planetariums. And again, this is something from sort of during the Weimar period that started actually in the 1920s in Germany. You had this interest in projection and this interest in planetariums. And I think that this idea very much fed into the kind of things that we're seeing in this piece. And there was a man named Zeiss, and Zeiss invented these incredible planetarium projectors that would project the stars into these domes. This is one of the domes this is before the dome has been built. They put the projector on its platform, and then the dome is built. And then here is another one where you see the seats and the dome in place. I'm going to show you, I think it's a very short film. It's so nerdy and wonderful of the Zeiss projectors. Here's a more contemporary one that's probably like they have at also built by Zeiss, but a more contemporary version of it. And then they've also made these small projector rooms where that you have this in a smaller way.
Yes, we bring it up in the dusk usually, and with rather dramatic music quite frequently, and it's usually quite scary sometimes.
Well, there are a great many lenses I see here. I guess as it gets up farther, you can tell us what it is and how it works as far as that is concerned.
Actually, there are about 100 different projectors, and of course that means a great many more lenses than 100.
You have the two ends. Are they identical in projection?
They're identical in the sense that
I think I'm not going to show too much of that. I think that it's very funny though, because it's as though you had sort of the Bauhaus with these moving projections, and then at the same time you had this tremendous birth of this planetarium and projection technology, where you to put this in perspective, somebody like George Gross was the first person to really do projection in theater. And so that right before this was happening, you had artists working with literally glass plate lantern slide projectors, the kind of thing that I work with. I'm going to grab one right here off my desk. You had things like these this is actually a German one from the period, these glass lantern slide projectors, so that you suddenly moved from things like these glass plate lantern projectors into this high-end projection technology that basically created these spaces where the viewer would be sitting among the lights and among the stars. So I find that Peine really kind of, I feel that it comes out of that, or it's part of this. So I'm just going to show you a quick Peine film right here.
Peine, nach abgeschlossenem Philosophiestudium und Akademiebesuch, hat vor Jahren schon den Pinsel beiseite gelegt, verschiedene Rasterbilder hergestellt und schließlich erklärt, nicht ich male, sondern das Licht.
Mijn favoriete kunstwerk wat we tonen op zaal, dat is absoluut Otto Peine's Venus van Willendorf. Een heel mooi abstract werk. Als je er lang voor staat en je ziet allerlei vormen.
I put this in for sort of a silly reason. And that was that I also wanted to show you that Peine was involved in many different explorations. And there were always, what I love about his work was a kind of directness, where you have the simplicity of those projections coming through these lattice-like structures. And at the same time, he was doing some other explorations with smoke and fire, as well as the kinetic work. And what I liked about Peine was that in a strange way, there's an incredible simplicity to the work. The technology between the light ballet is a really pretty simple technology. It's not like the Zeiss projector. And also the ideas of the smoke and the fire pieces. I think that for me, that is really there's a kind of simplicity of the poetic genius of Peine. I actually was not as impressed by his later MIT work, where he was blowing up those big tubes and sending them into the sky and working with this kind of thing, where he was working with, the proliferation of the sun. This is from the Neue Gallery in Berlin, where he did, a huge, these were slide projection pieces where he was working with slides, doing these big extravaganzas. And, it's sort of like when artists join Pace Gallery and they get a lot of money, it can get bigger, but not necessarily better. And in a strange way, even though the collaborative work was so interesting with the late Peine, I find that there's something for me personally about the simplicity of this early light ballet and the simplicity of the smoke and fire pieces, where it takes it into another, for my taste, it takes it into another poetic dimension. I wanted to talk a little bit about the people who have really been influenced by this work. I think that many artists have really would not be doing the work that they're doing today if Peine had not done this early work. And I think that many of the artists, this is a Sarah Z piece, And it obviously has a lot of hundreds of little mini projectors and technically complicated timing piece where all of these little guys go off at different times. But in the same way, there's a kind of wonderful simplicity to this piece at the same time. And I think that for me, that a lot of artists, where I was not a big fan of a lot of later kinetic art that seemed very mechanistic and predictable, where you would have thousands of repetitions of the same sort of thing, where I think that for me, the artists who really echoed Peine in the most interesting way are the ones where you had this incredible spontaneity and this idea of a kind of chance entering in. And this is like this piece. And here I put this in because there you've got this wonderful star pattern again. Not all of the, poor Roger Hendricks, I mean, not all of the people I think who worked with us did it in as interesting a way, but you could see that he was certainly influenced by this work. A work that I think takes Peine's influence in a really interesting way and brings Peine's influence into our time, and into a time of kind of multiculturalism and an idea of taking this kind of projection that's very simple in one way, but taking it into, I think Peine would have loved this piece, taking it into a much bigger philosophical dimension. This is an artist from Pakistan who's from a Muslim background, but as you know, women in that religion are were not allowed in some of these religious spaces. And when she went to the Alhambra, she saw this work and she created, I saw this work at the Asia Society. And it's funny, the first thing I thought about when I saw it was Peine's work. And it also, this has a very bright bulb, so that this artist has really taken Peine's idea and the simplicity of it and the poetry of it into a new dimension. I'm going to show you, the last thing I'm showing you is a very short film by this kind of, I think that this is one of the great heirs to this piece.
The whole time that I've lived in Pakistan, I may have gone inside a mosque maybe 5 times, and it may have been only because of tourism. So I've never actually gone inside a mosque to pray. That was a public space that could have been a world of creativity for women, but they are not allowed to be in there culturally. Taking that world of creativity that was kept away from me, I'm using that to create this. My awareness of the Alhambra was from a very early age. Being there, I kind of realized how important that architectural space is for both the East and the West, because that's where the East and the West met. The artisans were not just Muslims. They were Jewish as well as Christians who were brought in because of their ability to create beautiful environments. In my imagination or romantically, I kind of thought, what a beautiful jewel set in time. With all of these things happening around it, it's created this metaphor of union. And then to compare it to our times now, it became very relevant, in my opinion, to use it as a symbol where we can maybe strive to be at that moment again. And so Alhambra became like a linchpin to create the project around. The photos are what I use to remind myself of what I had seen and then draw from that. So they allow me to not have an exact replica, but it allows me to create an interpretation of the design that I saw. I wanted to use a really strong light that would really shine and create strong, crisp shadows. So the wattage on this bulb is about 600 watts. The object is small, but it has this big presence because of the light. So it changes the environment into this cathedral-like space or a mosque-like space that becomes extremely full. So it's no longer that object that's only 6.5 feet square, but it's like encompassing the entire space. When I walk through it, or when you walk through it, it becomes very experiential because the light casts the shadows on our bodies, so we become part of the environment. It allows everybody of every denomination, color, race, creed, sexuality to be in that space because it's a place of beauty. People are coming to see it because it is creating an environment that makes them welcome in it. That, to me, is very important.
I think I don't know how I do stop share. I think that for me, I wanted to show this work because I think that for me, I'm taking a different approach to this Peine piece, but for me, the thing that was so extraordinary about it was the idea of entering into both an imaginal space and a poetic space. And also the simplicity of it. I showed her work because here you've got this 600-watt bulb or something that creates this magic. And also with the Peine piece, this very simple technology, simple stencil that is, for me, an incredible work of poetic genius. As I said, I'm somebody who really visited that particular room at the Guggenheim many times, and I was completely knocked out by it. So I hope that this doesn't upset this is not non-techie or something, that having this Druid lecture on this piece, but I want to thank you for letting me share about why I love this piece so much. So thank you.
Thank you. That was such a nice journey you took us on. Really, never see the piece the same again. Anybody here from the guests, any comments or feedback?
Thank you for the fabulous lecture, Anne, and it has really taken us, throughout the course of history of art in the 20th century and beyond that. And I loved all these connections that you've made with architecture and with theater and with sculptural objects that are turned into this expanded field and into environmental art. And I think there are so many beautiful affinities with your own work that come out throughout your lecture in terms of the use of elemental substances, right? Like air and like fire, and also this focus on cosmology and spirituality. And Peine was also very keen on that, and this kind of critique of materialism that had taken humanity to the Second World War. And what I wanted to ask you is, I haven't experienced the work myself. I've always been enchanted with it. So I've dreamt of experiencing it, but I've never been in the light ballet work. And I was wondering about the temporality of it, and I liked your juxtaposition with Léger ballet mécanique. But I also feel there's a different rhythm there, right? There's this kind of rhythm that is staccato, that has more connection with leisure and the chaos and Dadaism, but there's also this kind of fluidity that comes from the rotation of the lights that we see in Peine's work. So I was wondering if you could comment more on that.
I think that you're absolutely right. There's a kind of there's a kind of staccato thing to the ballet mécanique, but I wanted to show it because you get what there are segments of it where you get the prismas, and the light and the swinging elements where it's you kind of have to take bits of it and enter into bits of it where you see that idea of it. It's if you realize what film was like before that film was made and what spaces were like before that film was made, I think that you can see, I put that film in because Peine basically kind of named the piece after it. And also that was a really big influence on him. And I wanted to show that to the people because you could see how little sections of that, where you're kind of entering that moving space, that even though it's much more staccato and you could see why he was very influenced by that. It's funny, we live in a modern world where we've seen so much of that moving stuff and been immersed in so many immersive environments that we're pretty jaded. But for Peine, you can see how that film from the 20s really, was a revelation, in post-war Germany.
I fully agree with that. I just feel there's another layer to it. And I think,
there are many layers to that film.
In his work, there's this kind of pairing between forces that may ultimately become destructive, right? That have to do with the anxieties of the war, and also this kind of compelling need to turn to the peaceful uses of technology and towards this more serene rhythm that has to do with the movement of the cosmos.
Mm-hmm.
I think, it's a big problem for I knew boys, and it was a huge problem for artists coming out of that. Also both of them had been soldiers. I mean, it was a huge problem for people coming out of that, where Germany was basically just in rubble, and their world was in rubble, and the whole Hitler ideology was in rubble. A kind of 3,000-year-old Reich, this fantasy of this had come completely crashing down. And so I think that you have to realize that all of these post-war German artists were really suffering from major national trauma of a collapse of an entire worldview, wanting to create something different, a kind of existential anxiety, all of the above. I mean, I think it's very hard for us to imagine this right now. People like Victoria who've been through I don't know if you were through the bombing of Belgrade, but you probably have a better understanding of it than some of us silly Americans. So, but I think also Peine was a philosopher. I mean, Peine read philosophy. He was really interested. He was a big thinker. He was exploring these ideas. He was changing his ideas. I mean, he was reading everything from Spinoza to Kant. He was really, I think that the realms, the intellectual realms he inhabited were quite interesting and probably also quite mysterious in some ways.
Ellen has.
Yes, so, thank you, Anne, for a wonderful presentation. And I love following the connections that I thought that was really very meaningful. And it struck me, like I think it struck Christina too, that there's something redemptive about his work, that here he had been a soldier and the overhead views that people would have seen on the ground were fiercely threatening, and then putting it to a different kind of use, not just peaceful, but actually in some way healing, reminding one of the cosmos and our connection to it was very important. But while Anne was talking about the iconography of the dome repeated, I was thinking similarly of some of the iconography of phenomena in the cosmos. For example, Halley's Comet. You see it in the Bayeux Tapestry, then you see it in a Giotto. And each time you see it not only does the comet appear very rarely, every so 100 years or whatever, but the way it reappears and what people make of it, from thinking of it as a war substance, something to be fought, some evil creature, according to the mythology, to something that is healing, has also changed depending upon the time. So it does get into how these things are regarded. Now, I've heard the term used, you've probably heard them also, the term social physics. And I always think of Peine's work with regard to this, the idea that lights are the protagonist. They have an effect on our bodies and our minds. And his hero, in a sense, is a non-human protagonist. And I think because of where we are in history at this moment, this is a focus for many of us, and can join into his thinking through his work, and think of what would it mean to give agency to light, or even ask the question, does light have its own agency?
Mm-hmm.
I've been reading a book which some of you may have come across also, about invention and inventors by Benjamin Labatut, entitled When We Cease to Understand the World. And it goes into some of the thinking of physicists as they were trying to understand quantum physics or mysteries. And I think that these beautiful experimental videos that we're looking at really give you this incredible mystery. Thank you very much.
Oh, that's very lovely. Thank you. You know, it's
Great.
funny. I kind of liked what Ellen said, because in one way you're thinking of these ideas of physics and a kind of expanded notion of the universe with Peine's work. And at the same time, Peine's work kind of takes you back down as well, which is what I like about it. I collect lantern slides. And it's so funny because I have these dinners once in a while at my house. I have hundreds of lantern slide projectors, and I collect lantern slides, and I'll have these dinners at my house with probably the most techie people in New York, like Peggy Awesh and Bradley Eros and the people from Octopus, you know, and all of these people also collect lantern slides. So you'll have somebody like Peggy Awesh, who works with the most techie stuff, comes with her incredible collection of biblical lantern slides, so that you'll have so that people will come to my house, and we'll set up. We'll after dinner we clear the place, and I have a projection table set up with about 8 of these old projectors, and we have to plug them in at different points in my place so that we don't blow a fuse. And we will show all of these images of, you know, like Noah's Ark landing with a Zeppelin or a spaceship and some other Chinese person. And we mix up all of these lantern slides and create, and it's amazing, like having this silent kind of old-fashioned, wonderful projection technology all mixed up, that people who are working with the most advanced technology, suddenly, like, everybody stops and time stands still, and you come down to this place where you're basically around the campfire again with the simplicity of the projected image. And for me, I think also what I loved about the Peine piece was it takes me back to that space.
Speaking of space, David Famillion and Karen Moss, his partner, were in residence at the Berman Foundation while it was still at Santa Ynez. And you and Karen actually had us move it, remember? I'll share how it looks. but you can talk
I
over.
redesigned it. Is that what you're talking about?
Oh, you redesigned it. Oh, that's great.
Yes.
So here it is, just it's a 1 minute, but it'll give you an idea of how it was in the space. Thanks to David and Karen, who actually were responding to it exactly as you are, where they felt it was really necessary to have it in its own space. So before that, it was in the large collection, it was one of the pieces. And you can see it's going into the whole structure now.
Oh, how wonderful. Oh my God. Come to my lantern slide dinner. You're on, baby, you're on.
And so now, but now it's at the Butler Museum. So I think they set it up. Did they set it up already, Bess?
Yeah, and it is in a small space, like what do they call this room that they put it in, but the way it was in the end of the gallery in its own room, so you can really see the.
That's really great. So Christina, are you close to the Butler Museum? Maybe we can get you over there.
I'm in Kansas City now, so not that close, I think.
Midwest.
a lot closer than LA for sure.
That's true.
So I'd like to, Anne, thank you. That was really nice. I think and Victoria will not be surprised, and even Ellen won't be surprised. I like the randomness of it, and I'm working on the Getty PST exhibition on complexity, and the question is with today how we can use self-organization or other issues of complexity to do more with the lights that you couldn't do then. That was all mechanical and analog. And I don't think anybody is really, a few people I've been beginning to discover have explored that mechanically, but but I haven't seen a lot of lights that do this in as a complex way as that is. I remember when we showed Paul D. Marinas did a piece for us, which was needles that were hitting a piece of tin foil, and there were 36 with the speaker. And so the speaker was acting like a magnet, and there was 36 of them. And then every once in a while, they'd all be in sync. And then they would dissipate, and then they'd all be in sync. And that wasn't even programmed, and you had some self-organization happening of some sort. I don't know how that happens, but Victoria's nodding, going, you see that?
It's the clocks, right?
Yeah. So I just, I think there's a lot of ways that this could be expanded. I thought the piece of the piece you showed with the Muslim artist, I just thought it was too static. It had this sort of spiritual space, but I love the movement and that it's alive in some way, and sort of.
When you're actually in that piece, well, I saw that piece at the Asia Society, and when you're actually in it, that thing just moves ever so slightly.
Oh, okay, but that didn't come across.
It's not the same kind of movement, but it is a very poetic space. As people walk through it, it does move slightly.
Oh, that's all. That's all. It doesn't have to be huge. It's like
it just moves slightly in the room. It just moves slightly, but it was a very poetic piece, and I thought that one of the problems right now is, I worked in the theater for a long time, doing projection for theater, and I'm also good friends with. I write a lot on William Kentridge. So Kentridge and I have had a discussion a lot about, because Kentridge and I both collect old equipment, and Kentridge has talked a lot about what he calls dinosaur technology or Stone Age technology, where he's doing like the dancing skeleton. He's doing that stop action photography to create his things. Really, with the oldest pre-Lumiere brothers kind of. I think it was the Lumiere brothers who did that dancing skeleton film. Very old technologies. And Kentridge and I were saying that sometimes there is a real magic. It's like my lantern slide evenings, where you're actually having to change the slides by hand in the, the slides go in, this is a modern one, actually. The slides go in these, things where they're changed by hand, this is one of, so that you're always, working where Kentridge said that he feels that there's something magical when you can actually see how, the flat is pulled on and off the stage, or how the technology, the simplicity of it. And in a strange way, that was what I really liked about the Peine piece or even about that 500 watt, 600 watt bulb, was that sometimes, I was working in the theater world with all of these incredibly complicated, of course, I don't do them, I have students for that, but these incredibly complicated programs. And sometimes it's not as magical as just these really simple things, like an old lantern slide machines that had one simple bulb. And so I think that for me, part of the magic of that Peine piece was its simplicity as well.
Yeah, but I think that's what we have to discover with our technology, is where the magic is. I don't think it's just nostalgia, that the simplicity. I mean, at one point that wasn't simple. That was the highest technology. And, so I think it's how we approach our technologies that inform, how magical they can be.
Yeah, I think there's something sorry to interrupt, but there's something to be said about the need for simplicity now, especially in the incredibly complex world. So it's not one negating the other, but I've noticed very clearly from students who are really good at programming and doing 5 million technological things that they love to see something that's analog, simple to the core. And there's almost a fascination of, wow, this can be achieved with just one light bulb. Why am I doing all that? Or it almost informs back to going to the higher technological current technology.
I agree with Victoria. I mean, I had Yale students who knew Watch Out, Isadora. I mean, they could do every computer program known to man. And you would have these just blowouts in the theater of just kind of bombarded with fantastic cosmic effects with a kind of that would just set off a kind of fatigue. Whereas, like Peggy Awesh, who probably is one of the most technologically advanced people I know, coming in with one of these simple lantern slides could be just as magical. And I think that there's something, I mean, Kentridge and I talk about this a lot, about this idea where he was saying that sometimes just he works with, what do they call them? They used to call them Ballet-opticons, these kaleidoscopic viewers, where you had two images and it creates the space, of working sometimes with these very simple things can be miraculous.
Jonathan Crary has this book called Techniques of the Observer, in which he really looks into the history of these optical devices and places a lot of emphasis on this sense of embodied presence that they conferred, right? Because you are setting your body in motion and you become very much aware of the mediating qualities of it in terms of your perception. So I think that's part of it. It's not necessarily new versus old, but the way in which we might use also new media to make us more aware of how our bodies and minds work and the role they have in filtering information and subjecting it to distortion, right? And the way we move also, right, in this light ballet ourselves, right, and the way we influence our perception of this rotating light. I think, that adds to the magic of it. That's why I think, there's no possible way of really connecting to it visually just through documentation. That sense of embodied presence is so much needed. And that's to that unpredictability that David was mentioning. That's not immediately apparent when you see it on the screen.
It reminds me of years ago when I brought over Tibetan monks to Jim's nanotech lab, right? And he's showing them all the equipment and it's amazing. And at one point, one of them said, all this to create empty space. And I just thought it was such a lovely, extreme presentation of how we are all searching for that empty space that's a cosmos inside of us, outside of us. So it's not even about the technology, it's about what creates the magic, because you could have the same exact mechanism in an IKEA store, identical, that will not create the magic. So what is it that is embedding it, that's got so much more that informs us, that's not visible or audible, that is the magic? It's all that he's gone through and lived through that went into that light bulb and that piece that created the magic, right?
I think also it has to do with psyche, and for something to resonate, it has to, like, this is the problem with a lot of my Yale students who are just like bombarding dancers and people, burning them off the stage with complex projections. It became utterly fatiguing at times. Is that if we're like, an example of a very simple projection for stage would be Samuel Beckett's The Not I, where he just has the mouth projected on the stage, where, and it's so much more powerful because it has to do with something from within the psyche, within the imagination. Mm-hmm. So I think that part of it is linking something deep within the psyche, deep with the imagination, and then it's projected outwards. If you don't have that link between the internal world and what is projected outwards, it just can become this fatiguing display, and it doesn't resonate. I mean, I look at that Samuel Beckett work, and it's just, I mean, it's a very, very simple thing, but it's, I mean, it really hits you on some of the deepest levels. And so I think that is a lot of it, is getting this connection between the inner and the outer. Mm-hmm. And I think sometimes in this case, less is more.
And sometimes it takes a lot to create that less. Right?
Yes, Victoria, yes, Victoria, yes, that's
where we're, I get an applause from Anne, wow. What a wonderful presentation. And I love that you brought in the psyche and the internal struggle being put into the cosmos, brought back to earth. I mean, that's all, we all are dealing with it, and God knows we're dealing with it in a big way now.
You know, it's funny, Peine died in a taxi cab.
I read that too.
En route to his show of these kind of giant, they're sort of like tubes filled with helium or something, these big kind of amoeba things going up into the sky over the Neue Gallery in Berlin. And it's over this Mies van der Rohe building, this kind of craziness. And it's funny that he kind of comes, this world of the Zeiss projectors, the world of the planetarium, the world of all of this, kind of, he dies. It's like his life comes around full circle.
Yeah. I feel sad he never made it to his opening though.
Well, he did. He just made it in spirit.
Oh, okay. All right.
He made it to all. He made it to all his other openings.
Well, but in spirit, I'm sure he got out of the taxi and went.
Yeah, I mean, he was probably hovering in the astral plane over the world.
Definitely.
Thank God I don't have to talk to those people. I can just enjoy it.
Oh, well,
thank you, Victoria and Ellen and everybody.
Thank you so much. I learned a great deal. I thoroughly enjoyed your entire talk, and I love the piece you shared at the end. I thought it was so beautiful and meditative and peaceful, and so thank you for sharing it.
I think that one of the ways of knowing if a work of art is great is sort of seeing its children. Mm-hmm. And that Pakistani artist is not imitating Peine. She's not an imitator, but is someone who is kind of taking that spirit into another new place. And I think that for me, that was kind of, I saw that piece and I thought, I want to show that, to show the great work taken into another place. So I want to, I want to thank you very much.
That's
So
great.
everybody's grateful, including people in the streaming audience. Erika Matsunami says a big thank you very much for a wonderful and creative space and for a very nice presentation. And I say the same to you, and thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Victoria.